You're lying in bed tonight with a thermostat on the wall. It clicks on when the temperature drops below your chosen number. You adjust it without thinking. The heat arrives through vents you never see. You sleep through the night in a room that stays exactly 70 degrees, hour after hour, until morning. Now consider a different night, a cabin where winter darkness lasts 20 hours, where the air outside reaches 50 degrees below zero, where no power lines run, no gas pipes connect, no furnace hums in a basement, just a wood stove, a family, and knowledge accumulated across generations about how to sleep warm when the wilderness outside wants to freeze everything it touches. This is how remote Alaskan cabin families make it through winter nights, not with technology you forget about, but with fire they tend, wood they've cut and dried, and rhythms they follow as naturally as breathing. The work begins long before they close their eyes. It continues in the middle of darkness. It shapes how they build, what they wear, where they sleep, and how they think about warmth itself. Tonight, we'll follow that rhythm. We'll explore the small decisions and careful practices that add up to survival in one of the coldest inhabited places on Earth. The pace will be slow. The details will be specific. And if you drift off somewhere along the way, that's exactly right. These families have learned to sleep soundly in conditions that would terrify most of us. Perhaps there's something calming in understanding how they do it. Let's begin where the cabins stand. The interior of Alaska stretches across a vast basin between two mountain ranges. The Alaska Range runs along the south. The Brooks Range defines the north. Between them lies territory larger than most countries, crossed by rivers that freeze solid for 8 months, and forests of spruce so dense you can walk for days without seeing sky. This is where the cabins exist. Some sit along riverbanks, positioned for summer access by boat. Others occupy clearings carved from black spruce stands, reached only by snow machine in winter or bush plane year-round. A few cluster in loose communities of 8 or 12 families spread across 20 miles. Many stand alone, the nearest neighbor a 2-hour journey away. The families who live here represent different histories. Indigenous Athabascan communities have occupied these lands for thousands of years, their cabin building incorporating knowledge about cold that predates contact with Europeans. Homesteaders arrived in waves throughout the 20th century, drawn by land programs or the simple desire to live beyond the reach of urban systems. Multi-generational families now include elders who remember kerosene lamps and grandchildren who've never known a light switch. What they share is distance from the grid. These cabins exist beyond power line infrastructure. No roads connect them to towns. Fuel arrives by plane or barge during brief summer months. Supplies come in twice a year, if weather permits. Medical emergencies require radio calls and hour-long flights to Fairbanks or Anchorage. In this context, warmth isn't about comfort preferences. It's about the difference between sleep and hypothermia, between a family that thrives through winter and one that doesn't make it to spring. The temperatures define everything. During the coldest months, December through February, nighttime temperatures of -40 are common. -50 happens several times each winter. -60 occurs in extreme years, the kind old-timers mention when teaching younger families what to prepare for. This cold is different from what most people imagine. Residents describe it as dry. The air holds almost no moisture at these temperatures. This affects how the cold penetrates. Wet coastal cold at 20 degrees finds its way through layers, through walls, into bones. Dry interior cold at -50 behaves differently. It's sharp and immediate on exposed skin, but it doesn't carry moisture that condenses and freezes inside structures. This quality shapes how cabins are built and how families manage interior humidity. The darkness is the other constant. At winter solstice, the sun rises around 11 in the morning and sets by 3 in the afternoon, if you're far enough south to see it rise at all. Families 150 miles north of Fairbanks experience weeks when the sun never clears the horizon. Twilight arrives for a few hours around midday. The rest is darkness. This isn't the darkness of a city night, where streetlights and neighbors' windows create ambient glow. This is darkness so complete that standing outside means seeing nothing. Not your hand in front of your face, not the ground beneath your feet, not the cabin wall 3 steps away. Only starlight on snow provides any reference. Families learn to navigate by memory and by the small pools of light from windows that mark home. These conditions, extreme cold and extended darkness, create the parameters within which everything else happens. Every decision about where to place a bed, what wood to burn, when to wake and tend the fire, flows from these 2 facts. The families who sleep warm through these nights have learned to work with this environment rather than fight it. They've learned that you can't heat the wilderness. You can only create a small, warm space and defend it carefully. That defense begins with the structure itself. 40 below zero on a thermometer looks like a number. Living inside that number changes it into something else entirely. At -40 Fahrenheit, breath freezes instantly into ice crystals that hang in the air. These ice crystals catch any light, a lantern, a headlamp, the moon, and create glittering clouds around your face. Inhaling pulls sharp cold into your lungs. The sensation is distinct from ordinary cold. It feels brittle. Each breath requires intention. Exposed skin registers the temperature within seconds, not as the slow chill of a winter day in milder climates, but as immediate numbness spreading from the point of contact. Cheeks, nose, fingertips, these go numb first. The numbness can feel almost warm, which is part of what makes frostbite dangerous. The body's pain signals shut down before damage becomes obvious. Metal conducts this cold instantly. Touching a doorknob or axe handle without gloves means skin freezing to the surface. Pulling away tears, skin. Children learn this young, usually from a single mistake they never repeat. Adults wrap tool handles in leather or cord, creating barriers that allow grip without contact. This is the cold that surrounds the cabins for 4 to 5 months each year. Understanding how it behaves, how it moves, where it penetrates, what stops it, determines whether families sleep comfortably or dangerously. The cold settles. This is crucial. Warm air rises, cold air sinks, and at these extreme temperatures the difference becomes pronounced. The coldest air pools in valleys and low areas. A cabin built in a river bottom might experience temperatures 10 degrees colder than one on a hillside a quarter-mile away. Families know their microclimates. They know which clearings hold cold and which benefit from even slight elevation. Cold also flows like water. It pours down slopes, follows ravines, pools in depressions. On calm nights, you can feel the difference walking from high ground down toward a frozen creek. The temperature drops in layers. Smart cabin placement accounts for this, seeking spots where cold air drains away rather than accumulates. Wind changes everything. On calm nights at -50, you can stand outside for several minutes if properly dressed. Add 15 miles per hour of wind, and the effective temperature, what your body experiences, drops to -80. Exposed skin freezes in under a minute. This is why cabins face away from prevailing winds, and why the small entry porch functions as critical infrastructure rather than decorative addition. But most winter nights in the interior are calm. The extreme cold itself suppresses wind. High-pressure systems settle over the land and stay for weeks. The air becomes still, dense, heavy. This stillness is part of what makes the cold bearable. It's also what makes sounds travel with unusual clarity. A tree cracking from frost expansion can be heard for miles, sharp as a gunshot. The dry quality of this cold matters for how families maintain warmth. In humid cold, moisture from breathing, cooking, and bodies condenses on every cold surface. Ice builds up on windows, walls, even bedding. In the dry interior cold, moisture behaves differently. Families actively maintain some humidity, boiling water on the stove, hanging damp laundry near heat, because the alternative is air so dry it cracks skin and makes breathing uncomfortable. This dryness also means that proper insulation and air sealing work more effectively. There's less moisture trying to migrate through walls, less condensation freezing inside the structure itself. The battle is simpler. Keep warm air in, keep cold air out, maintain just enough humidity for comfort. The cold has rhythms. Coldest temperatures arrive in the hours just before dawn, when night has been longest and any stored warmth has radiated away. This is when cabin temperatures drop most noticeably if the fire has burned too low. This is when families wake naturally, bodies sensing the change, knowing without checking that wood needs to be added. The cold also teaches patience. A cabin that's dropped to 50 degrees inside can't be rushed back to 65. The stove needs time. The logs need to catch, to build heat, to radiate warmth into the space. Families who try to force speed, opening the stove damper too wide, creating roaring fires, waste wood, and create dangerous temperature swings. The ones who sleep most comfortably have learned to work with the cold's pace, maintaining steady, moderate heat rather than fighting for extreme warmth. There's a threshold most families recognize around -25. Above that temperature, the cold is manageable with standard winter practices. Below it, everything intensifies. Wood consumption increases. Fire tending becomes more frequent. The margin for error shrinks. At -50, a stove that goes out in the night means waking to a genuinely dangerous situation. But families don't experience this as constant anxiety. They experience it as rhythm, as knowledge, as practice. The cold becomes familiar. They read it the way others read weather forecasts, noticing subtle signs, how snow squeaks underfoot, how smoke rises, how the cabin walls tick and crack as wood contracts. This reading begins with the structure itself. The cold surrounds the cabin constantly, testing every joint and gap. The cabin's response to that pressure determines everything that happens inside. The cabin begins as a decision about trees, not just any trees, specific ones. The spruce and pine that grow dense and straight in the interior forests of Alaska, where winters teach wood what it needs to become. Families who build their own cabins or maintain cabins built by those who came before understand that warmth starts here, in the diameter of a log, in the timing of its harvest, in the species chosen from among the dark stands that surround their clearing. 10 to 14 inches across. That measurement appears again and again in remote cabin construction. Smaller logs don't hold enough mass to buffer temperature swings. Larger ones become too heavy to lift and notch by hand, too difficult to transport from forest to building site without machinery most families lack. This middle range offers the balance: logs substantial enough to insulate, manageable enough to work. The wood itself matters as much as its size. Spruce dominates northern forests. It grows relatively straight, splits cleanly when needed for firewood, and seasons without the excessive warping that makes tight construction impossible. Pine offers similar qualities. Both species contain enough natural resin to resist rot, while lacking the density that makes hardwoods nearly impossible to notch and shape with hand tools. These aren't random preferences. They're conclusions reached through generations of building in places where a gap in a wall isn't an inconvenience. It's a threat. Winter harvest produces the best building logs. Families who plan to build mark trees in late fall then cut them between December and February when a sap has retreated deep into root systems. A winter-cut log weighs significantly less than one felled in spring or summer. It dries more evenly. The wood cures with less cracking, fewer splits that open channels for wind and cold. The logs lie through one full summer before construction begins. They need to dry, but not too much. Completely green logs will shrink dramatically as the cabin stands, opening gaps that require constant maintenance. Fully cured logs become so hard that notching them demands excessive effort. The compromise, logs that have weathered through one warm season, gives wood that has released much of its moisture but retains enough suppleness to work. You can see the difference between cabin logs and commercial lumber in how the wood accepts an axe. Commercial lumber comes from mills that process trees quickly, cutting them in summer when sap flows and machinery moves fastest. The resulting boards dry in kilns, fast and hot. They're uniform, predictable, and utterly unsuited to the kind of construction that keeps a family warm at 60 below. A hand-built log cabin uses whole rounds. The log's natural taper, thicker at the base, narrower at the crown, gets incorporated into the building pattern. Builders alternate thick and thin ends as they stack courses, maintaining relatively level walls despite each log's individual shape. This creates a structure that shifts slightly as wood expands with humidity and contracts in extreme cold, but never fails. The entire building breathes as one piece. The first course sits directly on the foundation, often just a perimeter of stones lifted above permafrost, or posts sunk deep where ground allows. This lowest layer takes the most abuse. Moisture wicks up from ground contact. Snowbanks against it through 8-month winters. These logs get replaced eventually, sometimes after 15 or 20 years, but the courses above them, protected from ground moisture, can stand for a century. Each log seats into the one below it through notches cut at the corners. The notch pattern determines how tightly the logs interlock, how much surface area presses together, how well the wall resists the lateral pressure of wind and the vertical compression of roof loads. A well-cut notch touches along its entire curved surface. You should not be able to slide paper between log and notch at any point. This precision isn't decoration. It's insulation. Air moves through gaps. Even a 1/4-inch opening, repeated at every corner across 40 courses of logs, creates a chimney effect that pulls warm air from inside and replaces it with air that's been sitting in darkness at temperatures that freeze exposed skin in minutes. The families who live in these cabins often inherited structures built by previous generations, or they purchased cabins from those moving on. But many built their own, spending 2 or 3 summers on construction before the building became livable. They learned notching by doing it wrong first. They discovered which trees split when notched too aggressively. They found out what happens when logs aren't alternated properly and walls lean inward as wood settles. this knowledge doesn't transfer easily through books or videos. It lives in hands that have shaped 500 notches and felt which ones seated correctly. It persists in the ability to read a log's grain and predict where it will check as it dries, then orient that log so the check faces inward where it won't collect water. The wood becomes the first layer of warmth, not because logs have exceptional insulation properties compared to modern materials, but because their mass stores heat. A 12-inch spruce log doesn't stop cold the way foam board stops it. Instead, the log absorbs warmth from the stove during evening hours when fire burns hot. It holds that heat in its mass. Then, slowly, through the long night, it releases that stored warmth back into the cabin's air. This thermal mass creates stability. The cabin doesn't spike hot and crash cold the way a thin-walled structure does. Temperatures shift gradually, giving families time to respond, to add wood, to adjust. The logs even out the extremes that would otherwise make sleep difficult. Too hot near the stove, too cold by morning. You can stand with your hand against the interior wall on a night when outside air sits at 40 below. The log feels cool to touch, not cold. That difference between cool and cold represents the wood doing its work, buffering the gradient between inside and out, making 60 or 70 degrees of temperature difference something a simple wood fire can maintain. The cabin is not a house. It's a system. And it begins with the specific diameter of a specific species, cut at a specific time, assembled with enough precision that the structure itself becomes the first defense against the kind of cold that redefines what warmth means. Between every log lies a decision about what fills the gap. The notches at corners create structural connection, but the long horizontal seams between each course of logs, sometimes 40 feet of seam repeated 20 times up the wall, these channels need to be sealed, not permanently, not with materials that lock moisture in place, but sealed enough that wind can't find its way through, that cold air stays outside and warm air stays in. This is chinking. And in remote Alaskan cabins, it represents knowledge that bridges centuries. The oldest cabins, those built in the early 1900s or constructed using methods passed down from indigenous and early settler traditions, used what the land provided. Moss, gathered from the forest floor in quantities that seem implausible until you try to fill a single wall's seams. Sphagnum moss, in particular, abundant in the boreal ecosystem, compresses into gaps and holds its position while allowing slight movement as logs expand and contract. The moss went in dry, packed tightly between logs with wooden tools that compressed it without tearing. Some builders soaked the moss first, packed it wet, then let it dry in place. It would swell with any future moisture, but remained porous enough to release that moisture through evaporation rather than trapping it against wood. Over the moss went a mixture of clay and mud, sometimes mixed with animal hair from caribou or moose hides. The hair acted as a binder, creating a matrix that held the clay together even as it dried and developed hairline cracks. This outer seal protected the moss from birds who would otherwise pull it out for nesting material and from the deterioration that came with direct weather exposure. These materials worked because they allowed what cabin builders call breathing. Wood expands with humidity. In summer, when air holds more moisture, logs swell slightly. In winter's extreme dryness, they contract. A seal that can't flex with this movement either breaks away from the logs or, worse, holds moisture against the wood when it should be allowing vapor to pass through. Moisture vapor is the enemy that doesn't announce itself with wind or cold. It comes from inside the cabin. Every pot of boiling water, every breath exhaled during sleep, every piece of wet firewood drying near the stove adds moisture to interior air. That vapor migrates toward cold. It moves through any path it can find toward exterior walls where temperatures drop. If chinking creates a perfect vapor barrier, moisture hits that barrier and condenses into liquid water. Liquid water against wood, repeatedly freezing and thawing through a winter, rots logs from the inside. You don't see the damage until structural integrity fails, until a log that looked solid crumbles when weight shifts against it. So traditional chinking was designed to stop wind while allowing vapor to migrate through at a rate slow enough that it could evaporate before accumulating as liquid. The moss and clay system achieved this. Not perfectly. These cabins required maintenance, rechinking every few years as materials weathered, but reliably enough that structures built this way a century ago still stand. Modern families face a choice when maintaining or building cabins. Contemporary materials offer easier installation and longer life between maintenance cycles. Foam backer rod, a flexible cylinder of closed-cell foam, can be pressed into gaps between logs. Over this goes chinking compound, a textured acrylic that adheres to wood and flexes with movement. The system creates an effective air seal, but it doesn't breathe the way moss and clay breathe. Some families use modern chinking only on interior walls, maintaining traditional moss chinking on exterior walls where breathing matters most. Others have shifted entirely to modern materials, but compensate by running small ventilation systems or simply opening windows regularly during warmer winter days, introducing intentional air exchange to prevent moisture buildup. There's no universal answer. Each cabin exists in a specific microclimate. A cabin in a relatively wet coastal area faces different moisture challenges than one in the dry interior. A family that cooks primarily with their wood stove generates more interior moisture than one using a separate propane cooktop. The number of people living in the space, the amount of wet gear brought inside, whether they dry clothes near the stove, all these factors change how much vapor the walls need to handle. What remains constant is the understanding that the seal between logs isn't simply about stopping cold. It's about managing the invisible movement of water vapor that, if trapped, causes damage far worse than any draft. The notches themselves, the curved cutouts at corners where logs interlock, present their own sealing challenge. A well-cut notch seats tightly enough that it needs minimal chinking. The weight of upper logs compresses lower ones, and the curve of the notch creates multiple contact points that naturally resist air movement. But notches also collect water, if not designed correctly. Rain and snowmelt can find their way into the horizontal surfaces where notch meets log. The best notch designs include a slight drainage angle, imperceptible to the eye, but enough to guide water outward rather than letting it pool in the joint. Families inspect their chinking every fall. They walk the cabin's perimeter looking for sections where material has cracked or pulled away, where gaps have opened as logs settled further, where birds or squirrels have damaged seals while foraging. This isn't optional maintenance. A gap the width of a finger, running even 5 feet along a seam, can account for a measurable drop in interior temperature overnight, enough that the fire needs feeding an hour earlier, enough that cold wakes you when it shouldn't. The repair work happens in September or early October, before temperatures drop so low that modern chinking won't cure properly, before fingers become too numb for the detail work of pressing material into narrow gaps. It's quiet work, meditative. You move slowly around the cabin's perimeter, reading the logs, understanding where the structure is shifted and where it's remained stable. Some gaps don't get chinked at all. Small, deliberate openings near the roofline allow the hottest, most vapor-saturated air to escape. Without these, moisture would condense on the coldest surface available, usually the underside of the roof, where it would create frost buildup inches thick, eventually melting and dripping back into the living space when temperatures rose. The cabin breathes, not like a living thing, but as a system that allows air and moisture to move in controlled ways, at rates that serve the family's need for warmth while preventing the damage that comes from trying to seal a wooden structure completely tight. This is the art that supplements the logs themselves, knowing what to seal and what to leave open, when to use materials that last decades, and when to accept that some maintenance will repeat every few years, understanding that the goal is not perfection, but balance between warmth and the inevitable presence of moisture in a space where humans live through long, dark winters. The cabin where a family will sleep through the long winter measures just 24 feet by 20 feet, 480 square feet. The entire living space, sleeping area, and kitchen occupy less room than many modern living rooms. This size is not arbitrary. It is not a compromise born of limited materials or construction time. It is a deliberate calculation made with full understanding of heat, fuel, and the long mathematics of winter survival. In a climate where temperatures sink to 40 or 50 below zero for weeks at a time, every cubic foot of interior space represents air that must be heated, maintained, and prevented from stealing warmth from sleeping bodies. A single wood stove can only radiate so much heat. The warmth it produces moves outward in diminishing waves. At the far edge of a large room, the temperature might drop 15 or 20 degrees compared to the area near the firebox. In a small cabin, there are no far edges. Every sleeping spot, every corner where children rest, remains within the effective radius of the stove's heat. The family did not choose this dimension by measuring and calculating on paper. They learned it from neighbors, from parents, from the accumulated experience of those who survived previous winters. 400 to 800 square feet. Almost every remote cabin falls within this range. Go smaller, and the space becomes difficult to organize around family life. Go larger, and the fuel demands multiply. The heat becomes uneven, and cold pockets form in distant corners where frost creeps across interior walls even while the fire burns. The shape matters as much as the size. The most efficient cabins approach a square rather than a long rectangle. A 20 by 24 footprint holds heat better than a 12 by 40, even though the square footage is identical. The square concentrates heat toward the center where the stove stands. The rectangle creates distant ends where warmth struggles to reach. Heat moves through air, radiates from surfaces, and rises toward the ceiling. A compact square shape works with these natural movements rather than against them. The ceiling height tells its own story, 7.5 feet, sometimes 8, rarely higher. Heat rises, and every inch of additional ceiling height represents warm air floating above the family's heads, unused and wasted. In modern homes, 10 or 12-foot ceilings create a sense of spaciousness and grandeur. In a winter cabin, they create a reservoir of heat that does nothing to warm sleeping bodies 5 feet below. The lower ceiling keeps warmth where it matters, in the breathing zone, at bed level, where children sleep and adults move through evening tasks. Some cabins add a sleeping loft under the peaked roof. This isn't wasted height. It's strategic use of the warmest air in the structure. The loft ceiling might be only 4 feet above the sleeping platform, creating a low, warm cocoon where children bed down in the hottest zone of the cabin. The loft doesn't add to the volume that must be heated. It captures heat that rises naturally and makes it useful. The single-room design eliminates hallways, separate bedrooms, and the compartmentalized layouts that work well in heated modern homes. Here, compartments would create cold zones, trap warmth away from sleeping areas, and multiply the fuel needed to maintain livable temperatures. The open plan allows heat to circulate freely. A family can see the stove from every sleeping spot. They can monitor the fire's status, judge the cabin's temperature, and respond quickly if the flames die down in the night. The door placement reflects the same heat logic. The main entry sits on the north or west wall, away from the stove, creating a buffer zone where cold air from outside gets trapped and diluted before it reaches the main living space. Many cabins add an Arctic entry, a small enclosed porch that serves as an airlock, preventing wind from blowing directly into the heated space when someone enters or exits. The overall volume of air inside the cabin might total just 3,000 to 4,000 cubic feet. A typical modern home contains 10 to 20,000 cubic feet or more. That difference represents the gap between heating with a few cords of wood per winter and heating with an impossible quantity that no family could split, stack, and haul. The small volume makes survival possible. It transforms the simple act of burning wood into a reliable source of warmth rather than a symbolic gesture against overwhelming cold. Families describe the size not as cramped, but as intimate. The closeness that might feel confining in summer becomes comforting when darkness lasts 20 hours and the world outside drops to lethal temperatures. The small space means children are always within earshot. It means the morning fire builder warms the entire cabin, not just one room. It means no one sleeps alone in a cold, distant bedroom, isolated from the heat source that keeps them alive. The physics are simple, even if the experience is complex. Heat a small space and you create warmth. Heat a large space and you create gradients, cold corners, and endless fuel consumption. The families who sleep warm through Alaskan winter nights understand this completely. Their cabins reflect that understanding in every dimension. The south wall holds 2 windows. Each measures 30 inches wide by 24 inches tall. The east wall has 1 window of similar size. The north wall, which faces the prevailing winter wind, has none. 3 windows total for a 480 square foot cabin. In a modern home of similar size, you might find 8 or 10 windows, perhaps more. Here, glass is treated as a necessary compromise, essential for daylight and psychological well-being, but fundamentally at odds with the goal of holding heat through the long winter night. Glass, no matter how well made, loses heat faster than a wood wall. A 6-inch log wall with proper chinking provides an R value, a measure of insulation, around 8 to 10. A single pane window offers an R value below 2. Even modern double-pane windows rarely exceed R3. This means that during a winter night when interior temperature hovers around 60 degrees and outside air sits at 40 or 50 below, the windows become thermal drains, pulling precious heat outward through the fragile barrier of glass. The families who built these cabins understood this completely. Windows face south and east for a specific reason. The brief winter sun arcs low across the southern sky, entering through south-facing glass for 3 or 4 hours during the short day. Even at 40 below, direct sunlight carries heat. The solar gain from those few hours of light helps warm the cabin during the day, reducing the load on the wood stove. East-facing windows catch the low morning light when it finally arrives, well after the family has risen and rebuilt the fire. North-facing windows would provide no solar gain. The winter sun never appears in the northern sky at these latitudes. North is the direction of polar cold, of wind that drives across hundreds of miles of frozen landscape. A north window would serve no purpose except to leak heat continuously. The windowless north wall becomes the cabin's strongest thermal barrier, unbroken logs and chinking facing down the coldest exposures. The windows themselves are often triple-track storms, a fixed inner pane, a removable middle pane, and an outer storm window that can be opened in summer for ventilation. The 3 layers of glass create 2 dead air spaces. Still air insulates better than glass alone. The setup is maintenance-intensive, requiring careful caulking and seasonal adjustments, but it improves the R value significantly compared to single-pane installations. As evening approaches and the brief winter daylight fades around 3 or 4 in the afternoon, a different kind of window management begins. Interior shutters swing closed over each window. These aren't decorative shutters. They're functional insulation panels made from inch-thick pine or spruce boards, sometimes backed with rigid foam, hinged to swing across the window opening from inside. When closed and latched, they create an additional dead air space between the shutter and the glass. The effective R value of the window area increases by several points. Heat that would radiate outward through the glass now reflects back into the cabin. The shutters also block the psychological effect of dark glass. At night, windows become black mirrors, reflecting lamplight and creating a visual reminder of the void outside. Shuttered windows simply become wood walls. The cabin feels smaller, more enclosed, more secure. Some families hang heavy wool blankets behind the shutters for additional insulation. Others stuff the gap between shutter and glass with crumpled newspaper or old fabric scraps on the coldest nights. The windows are small enough that shuttering them doesn't require significant effort. The evening routine includes checking that all shutters are fully closed and latched. Children often take responsibility for this task. It becomes part of the transition from day to night, from the brief period of light to the long hours of darkness. Morning reversal of this process brings its own ritual. As the fire builds and the cabin warms, someone opens the shutters to check for daylight. The windows often bear thick frost on their interior surface. Ice crystals groan from the family's breathing and cooking moisture. The frost creates intricate patterns, ferns and feathers and geometric flowers of ice. Children sometimes draw in the frost with fingertips before it melts. The frost itself indicates that the windows are the coldest surface in the cabin, confirming why they must be shuttered at night. The strategic placement and minimal number of windows represent a fundamental understanding. Light is essential. So is warmth. In summer, large windows would be welcome, bringing in the long daylight and allowing ventilation. In winter, the balance shifts entirely. The families choose warmth over view, insulation over openness. The shuttered cabin becomes a sealed box, holding heat with the same care that a thermos holds hot coffee. 3 small windows provide just enough connection to the outside world without compromising the interior warmth that makes sleep possible when darkness stretches 20 hours and the cold outside could kill in minutes. Before the door opens to warmth, there is another door. Before stepping into the main cabin, there is a small room that belongs neither to the inside nor the outside. Families call it the Arctic entry. Some call it a mudroom or cold porch. But the name that has settled across remote Alaska, Arctic Entry, captures what this space truly does. It stands between two worlds. The entry is small, perhaps 4 feet deep and 6 feet wide, sometimes smaller. The outer door faces the weather. The inner door opens to the heated cabin. Between them, this pocket of transitional air serves a purpose that becomes clear the first time you enter a cabin without one. Wind does not simply blow in Alaska's interior. It moves with purpose. At -40 degrees Fahrenheit, wind finds every crack, every momentary opening, every chance to enter warm spaces. A door opened directly from outside to inside creates a rush of displaced air. Warm air escapes upward. Cold air pours in low across the floor. The cabin loses heat in seconds. The fire must work harder to restore what was lost. The Arctic Entry prevents this exchange. When someone approaches the cabin from outside, they open the outer door. They step into the entry. They close that door behind them before opening the inner door. The cold air that enters comes only into this small buffer space. The warm air that escapes meets this boundary and stops. The temperature in the entry might drop to 0 degrees when the outer door opens, but the main cabin remains undisturbed. This matters more than it might seem. In a winter where families enter and exit for wood, for checking weather, for feeding sled dogs or retrieving tools, the entry protects the cabin's warmth dozens of times each day. Without it, the stove would burn twice the wood. Sleeping would become a battle against drafts that find ankles and faces in the dark. The entry serves other purposes too. It becomes storage for everything that should stay cold but not frozen. Root vegetables, butter, milk, game meat waiting to be processed. The space holds a temperature somewhere between the cabin's warmth and the outside cold, often between 20 degrees Fahrenheit and 40 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on how much heat leaks through the inner door and how much cold presses through the outer. Boots wait here. Parkas hang on pegs. Snow pants, mittens drying on a small shelf. Everything that carries snow and frost stays in this room, not tracking moisture into the dry warmth beyond. Children learn early to strip their outer layers in the entry, to brush snow from sleeves and collars before it melts. Some families keep kindling here, close to the door but protected from deep cold that makes wood difficult to split. A few pieces of birch bark, small sticks of dry spruce, a hatchet hanging within reach. This way, the morning's fire builder can gather what's needed without fully dressing for the cold. The construction of the entry varies. Some are built as part of the original cabin structure, extending from the main door with the same log walls, but perhaps a lower roof. Others are added later, framed with milled lumber and insulated with whatever materials are available. Foam panels, fiberglass, even moss packed between boards. The outer door often faces south or east when possible, positioned to avoid the prevailing northwest winds. Some families build a small roof overhang above this door to prevent snow from drifting against it during storms. A door that cannot open because of snow becomes a serious problem. The inner door is usually better sealed than the outer, weather stripping around its frame, a threshold that fits tight to the floor. This is the true barrier between warmth and cold, and families maintain it carefully. A gap here means continuous heat loss all night, every night. Visitors from outside Alaska sometimes find the double door system awkward at first. The pause in the entry, the moment of standing in dim cold before entering warmth. But families who live this way move through the sequence without thought. Outer door, Step inside. Close it firmly. Stamp snow from boots. Open inner door. Step into warmth. Close it behind you. The process becomes automatic, like any necessary rhythm. At night, the entry grows quiet and dark. No one lights it. The small space holds its intermediate temperature, its stored vegetables and hanging gear. It rests between the cabin's glowing warmth and the frozen world outside, doing its work without attention. This is where the cabin's warmth truly begins, not with the stove, but with this modest barrier that refuses to let heat escape easily into the hungry cold. The stove is the cabin's heart, not metaphorically, but as simple fact. Everything else, the insulation, the small space, the careful construction, exists to hold and distribute the heat this single metal structure produces. Most remote cabins use one of two types. The barrel stove is common because it can be made. A 55-gallon steel drum. A door cut into one end for loading wood. Legs welded to lift it off the floor. A stovepipe, collar fitted to the top or back. These stoves are built in towns and flown to remote sites, or constructed on site by families with welding equipment and scavenged materials. Barrel stoves burn hot and fast. The thin steel walls radiate heat immediately into the cabin. They are not efficient by modern standards. Much heat escapes up the pipe, but they are simple, repairable, and effective. A well-made barrel stove can last 20 years with proper care. The other common choice is a manufactured airtight stove. These are commercial models designed for extended burns. They have thicker steel or cast iron construction, baffles inside that force smoke and heat to travel a longer path before exiting, dampers that control airflow with precision, door gaskets that seal completely. These stoves burn the same wood for longer periods. Where a barrel stove might consume a load of wood in 3 hours, an airtight stove can stretch the same wood to 8 or 10 hours. This matters deeply when sleep depends on the fire lasting through the night. Some families use both. A barrel stove for daytime heat when someone is awake to feed it frequently. An airtight stove for overnight burns. But most remote cabins have only one stove, and that single unit must serve all purposes. Placement determines how well the stove heats the cabin. The ideal position is central, not against a wall, but somewhere in the middle of the floor space where heat can radiate in all directions. In a small rectangular cabin, this might mean placing the stove slightly off-center, closer to the sleeping area than the kitchen. In a square cabin, it might sit almost exactly in the middle. Centralized placement requires running the stovepipe straight up through the roof rather than through a wall. This is more work to install and seal properly, but it keeps the hottest section of pipe inside the cabin where its heat contributes to warming rather than escaping outside. The pipe itself becomes a radiator. As smoke rises from the stove toward the roof, the metal pipe absorbs heat and releases it into the room. In some cabins, the stovepipe accounts for nearly as much heat transfer as the stove body itself. Beneath the stove, families install a hearth. This is required safety, but it also adds thermal mass. The hearth might be stone, brick, concrete board, or metal sheeting. It extends at least 18 inches beyond the stove in all directions, protecting the wood floor from sparks and radiant heat that could ignite dry logs over time. Some families surround the stove with additional stone or brick. They build a low wall of fire brick around 3 sides, leaving the front open for loading wood, or they set river rocks around the stove's base. This mass absorbs heat during the evening when the fire burns hot, then releases that stored warmth gradually through the night as the fire dies down. A ring of stones heated to 200 degrees Fahrenheit at 10 o'clock will still be warm to the touch at 6 in the morning. This thermal battery helps moderate the temperature swings between fire loadings. The stove sits on its legs, elevated 4 to 8 inches above the hearth. This allows air to circulate underneath, prevents the bottom from rusting out prematurely, and makes ash removal easier. Some families keep a metal bucket beneath the stove to catch ash that falls through the grate, though most wait until morning to clean out the firebox completely. Distance from walls matters. Even with a central stove, the pipe must rise somewhere, and nearby walls face intense heat. Most families maintain at least 3 feet of clearance between the stovepipe and any wood surface. Where space is tight, they install heat shields, metal panels mounted an inch off the wall that deflect radiant heat. The stove's height relative to the sleeping platform influences comfort. If beds are built low and the stove sits high, sleepers might feel too much direct heat. If beds are lofted and the stove is low, the rising heat arrives perfectly. Families adjust these relationships over time, sometimes rebuilding sleeping platforms after living with a stove placement for a season. Proximity to the wood supply inside matters too. No one wants to carry wood across the entire cabin multiple times per night. Most families stack a day's worth of split wood within 6 or 8 feet of the stove, close enough to be convenient but far enough to avoid creating a fire hazard. The stove door faces toward the area where people spend waking hours. This allows tending the fire without moving furniture or navigating around obstacles in dim light. During evening hours when the family gathers, the stove's open door during loading becomes a brief source of firelight, something pleasant to watch. This metal box, sitting on stone, vented through the roof, becomes the center around which the cabin's life organizes. Chairs face it. Drying racks stand near it. Conversation happens around it. And through the long night, while the family sleeps, it continues its work, burning wood into warmth, asking only to be fed and maintained. The partnership that makes winter survival possible. In the hours before darkness settles completely, families make decisions that will determine the temperature they wake to. These choices happen at the woodpile. They involve knowledge accumulated across seasons and passed between generations. The question is never simply whether there is wood. The question is which wood, cut when, dried how long, and burned in what combination. Birch is the wood of movement and activity. Its bark contains oils that ignite quickly. The wood itself burns hot and fast, creating immediate heat that drives cold from corners and warms hands held near the stove. During daylight hours, when someone is awake to tend the fire, birch fills the cabin with warmth, but this same quality makes it poor choice for overnight burning. A stove loaded with birch at 10 in the evening will blaze bright and hot for 2 hours, then fade to coals by midnight, leaving the coldest hours before dawn without heat. Families learn this through experience. A child might load the evening fire with birch, attracted to how quickly it catches, how satisfyingly it crackles. The family wakes cold at 4 in the morning. The lesson stays. Spruce grows everywhere across interior Alaska. It is the most available wood, often the easiest to harvest near cabins. Its abundance makes it tempting. But spruce carries challenges. It contains more resin than hardwoods. This resin creates creosote, the dark, flammable substance that accumulates inside stovepipes and chimneys. Burn too much spruce without cleaning your chimney, and you risk chimney fires that can consume a cabin in minutes during winter darkness when water is frozen and help is hours away. Families who rely heavily on spruce develop meticulous cleaning routines. They inspect pipes weekly. They burn occasional hot fires specifically to reduce creosote buildup. Some mix spruce with other woods to dilute its effects. The wood serves, but it demands vigilance in return. Tamarack changes the equation. Also called larch, it is technically a conifer, but it behaves like hardwood. The logs are dense and heavy, They resist the saw. They demand more work to split. But once dried properly, a process requiring 18 months to 2 years, tamarack burns with steady, sustained heat. The flames are less dramatic than birch. The initial warmth is less intense. But hours later, when birch would have faded, tamarack still radiates heat from dense coals that glow orange in the dark. This is the wood families choose for overnight burning. Loading the stove for night becomes a deliberate act. This is not the casual adding of a log or two. This is engineering. The goal is 8 to 10 hours of continuous moderate heat, enough to keep interior temperatures from dropping below 50 degrees, even as exterior temperatures reach -40 or 50. Large logs go in first. These are the pieces too big to burn efficiently during the day, the ones that would smother a small fire. At night, their size becomes advantage. A log 8 inches in diameter and 16 inches long, placed in an already hot firebox, will burn slowly from the outside in, releasing heat gradually across hours. The logs are packed tightly. Airspace between them is minimized. Fire needs oxygen, and controlling oxygen controls burn rate. Logs touching each other share heat, maintaining combustion, but the reduced airflow slows the process. The wood doesn't blaze, it glows. It exhales warmth steadily into the night. Dampers adjust the final variable. Most wood stoves have intake dampers that control fresh air entering the firebox, and flue dampers that control draft up the chimney. For overnight burning, both close partially. Not completely. That would extinguish the fire or create dangerous backdraft. But enough to shift combustion into a lower gear. Families learn their stove's personality. One particular barrel stove might need its intake damper 3/4 closed and the flue damper half closed to achieve an 8-hour burn. Another stove, identical in appearance, might require different settings because its door doesn't seal quite the same way, or its pipe configuration creates slightly different draft. There is no manual for this. There are only winters of adjustment. The goal is not roaring flames. In fact, visible flames indicate wood burning faster than necessary, heat being pushed up the chimney and wasted. The ideal overnight fire shows only occasional flickers of flame at log edges, with most of the wood glowing red beneath a layer of ash that insulates and slows combustion further. This creates heat that is moderate but persistent. The cabin doesn't stay 70 degrees. It might drop to 55 or even 50 by morning, but this is enough. Under layers of wool and down, bodies stay warm. The cabin remains far above exterior temperatures, and most importantly, the fire never dies completely. Coals remain. In the morning, these coals form the foundation for the day's first fire. Without them, starting from scratch in a cold cabin is difficult. With them, kindling catches in minutes. The wood chosen tonight determines tomorrow morning's experience. This links evening and dawn, making sleep itself part of a continuous cycle of tending and being tended to by fire. The ritual begins around 9 or 10 in the evening, though the exact time shifts with the family's rhythm and the outside temperature. When cold settles toward -50, the fire receives attention earlier. When temperatures hover near -20, there is more margin for delay. But every night, before sleep, someone approaches the stove with intention. The cabin is already warm from evening activity. Dinner cooked on the stovetop has kept the firebox hot. The earlier fire, maintained casually through the afternoon and evening, has done its work. Now comes the transition from tended fire to sleeping fire, from flames that receive frequent attention to flames that must sustain themselves through darkness. First, the stove is assessed. Opening the door releases a wave of heat into the room. Inside, the condition of existing coals and remaining wood determines next steps. If large pieces still burn, they are left in place. If only coals remain, They are spread evenly across the bottom of the firebox, creating a bed of heat that will ignite the new load quickly. Ash is not removed. During active daytime burning, ash is cleaned out regularly to maintain airflow. But at night, a layer of ash serves as insulation. It slows combustion. It holds heat. Some families deliberately shovel ash to the front and sides of the firebox, leaving only the center clear, creating a controlled burn zone. The wood goes in with deliberation. These are the largest pieces, logs that might be 8, 10, even 12 inches across if the firebox allows. They were brought inside hours ago. They sit near the stove, not yet warm but no longer carrying exterior cold. Ice that clung to bark has melted away. The first log goes in parallel to the door, pushed toward the back. The second fits beside it or atop it, depending on firebox size. If the stove is large enough, a third log crosses the other two. The arrangement matters. Logs need contact points for heat transfer, but they also need space for initial flames to establish themselves around the wood. Some families add one piece of birch or split spruce to the load, not as primary fuel, but as catalyst. Placed on top where it catches quickly, this smaller piece creates flames that preheat the larger logs, helping them begin their slow burn before the fire settles into coals-only mode. The door closes. For a few minutes, all dampers stay open. The new wood needs oxygen to ignite fully. Through the stove's small glass window, if it has one, flames appear. They lick around the new logs. Bark catches and curls. The wood begins its transformation. This is the watching period. 5 minutes. Sometimes 10. The person tending the fire doesn't leave. They wait for confirmation that the load has truly caught, that the new logs aren't just scorching on the surface, but beginning to burn through. Then the adjustment begins. The intake damper closes partially. How far depends on experience with this particular stove, this particular wood, tonight's particular cold. The movement is measured. A quarter turn, a half turn. The goal is to find the point where combustion continues steadily but slowly. Next, the flue damper. This one requires more caution. Close it too much and smoke backs into the cabin. Close it too little and heat escapes up the chimney all night. The adjustment is incremental. Close it partially. Wait. Watch the flames through the door glass. Listen to the draw of the chimney. Make a final small adjustment. Some stoves have a third control, a bypass damper that routes smoke around or through a baffle system designed to extract more heat. Each control is a variable. Together, they transform the stove from an open fire into a controlled combustion chamber where burn rate can be engineered. The sound changes. The roar of an open fire diminishes. What remains is quieter. A gentle rushing of air being drawn in, the occasional pop of wood resin, a low, steady hum that will continue through the night. The heat changes too. The initial blast from the fully open fire moderates. The stove's surface stays hot, but not scalding. This is intentional. Extreme heat now means no heat later. The goal is sustained moderate temperature that will keep the cabin warm enough for sleep under blankets, not so warm that wood is wasted or the stove burns out by midnight. Before walking away, one final check. A hand hovers near the stovepipe where it enters the wall or ceiling. It should be hot, but not glowing. If it's too cool, the fire isn't drawing properly. If it's too hot, too much heat is being lost to the outside. Everything is confirmed. The stove is set. The wood will burn for the next 8 to 10 hours, slowly releasing energy stored from summer sun, transformed now into winter warmth. The person who loaded it knows approximately when they will wake, not because of an alarm, but because their body will sense the cooling cabin in the early hours before dawn. For now, the work is done. The stove ticks quietly as metal expands. The fire settles into its long, slow burn. And the family, one by one, moves towards sleep, trusting the physics of combustion and the knowledge built through seasons of cold nights. Most adults wake naturally around 2 or 3 in the morning. They wake not to alarms, but to something more subtle. A change in air temperature against exposed skin. A shift in the quality of sound as the fire settles lower. The body learning over seasons what the mind need not consciously track. The cabin has cooled perhaps 10 degrees since the evening fire loading. Not dangerously, not uncomfortably under the weight of wool and down, but enough. Enough that the stove needs attention before the family wakes to genuine cold in 4 more hours. One person rises, usually the same person each night, though roles shift over years and seasons. The rising is quiet, practiced. The floor is cold enough to feel through wool socks, but the path from bed to stove is short. 5 steps, 7. The cabin's small size, now an advantage. No lights at first. The darkness is nearly complete during these deepest winter months, but eyes adjust. The stove itself provides faint reference, a glow from seams around the door, the ghost of red through ash-covered coals, visible if you know where to look. Some families keep a small LED headlamp on the lowest setting nearby. Others work entirely by touch and memory. The person kneels before the stove, listens first. The quality of the remaining burn tells you what it needs. A soft ticking of contracting metal means the fire is low. Silence means you've waited almost too long. The faint crackle of wood still actively burning means you've woken early, which is good. Better to tend the fire before it truly needs you than to gamble on another hour of sleep. Opening the door releases what heat remains, a bloom of warmth into the face. The interior view tells the story the sound suggested. Coals glowing deep orange, covered with white ash, perhaps one log still holding shape, reduced to charcoal but not yet collapsed. The damper had been set for slow burn 8 hours ago. It has done its work. The ash needs minimal disturbance. Too much stirring releases trapped heat up the chimney and buries active coals. A single poker stroke, gentle, just enough to break up the ash layer and expose the living coals beneath. They brighten immediately when given air. This is what you're looking for. 2 logs, sometimes 3, depending on size and species and how many hours remain until morning. They're already here, brought in during the evening's final preparations. They've been warming beside the stove for hours, dried of any surface ice or snow. Cold logs work, but room temperature wood catches faster, burns cleaner. The placement matters, not thrown in casually but arranged. Logs positioned to create channels for airflow, placed where coals are hottest, oriented so their length fits the firebox precisely. This is knowledge built over hundreds of winter nights. The difference between waking to warmth and waking to a cold stove isn't dramatic technique. It's these small precisions. The damper adjustment comes next. More open than the overnight setting, but not fully. You want the new wood to catch and establish itself, but not to burn through before dawn. The sound changes immediately. A draw of air. The coals brighten further. Within 60 seconds, the first small flames appear at points where new wood contacts old heat. The door closes. The external damper is set. The stove returns to its work. The entire process takes perhaps 3 minutes. 4 if you pause to warm your hands over the briefly opened firebox. The person stands, returns to bed. The cabin is already marginally warmer from those few minutes of open door and increased draft. Back under the blankets, The cold that touched skin during the crossing to the stove makes the return to warmth particularly satisfying. The body heat trapped under layers during sleep is held. The bed is still warm. Outside, the temperature might be 50 below. In this moment, that fact is abstract, distant. Sleep returns quickly. The fire sounds different now, more active, the fresh wood beginning to hiss quietly as interior moisture vaporizes, the metal of the stove expanding again with renewed heat. These sounds don't prevent sleep. They enable it. They mean the work is done. The cabin is tended. The night can continue. Children growing up in remote cabins describe this memory with remarkable consistency. The sound of a parent rising in darkness, the creak of the stove door, the brief increase in light visible even through closed eyelids, the smell of fresh wood smoke, the return of footsteps, the settling of weight back into the other bed. For those children, these sensations meant safety. Someone was watching. The cold was being managed. The family was protected. Adults who experience these nights as children often speak of them as some of their most secure memories, not despite the cold and the primitive conditions, but because of the tangible proof that they were cared for. The person who wakes to tend the fire describes the experience differently, not as burden or interruption, but as meditation, a quiet moment alone in the depth of night, a simple task with immediate purpose, the satisfaction of competence, of knowing exactly what needs to be done and doing it well. This middle night rising happens every winter night during the coldest months. December, January, February, perhaps into March. It becomes so routine that its absence would be more disruptive than its practice. The body learns. The rhythm establishes. It is not resented because it is necessary, and because necessity accepted becomes simply life. The thermometer inside the cabin reads 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, it is 40 below zero. This 98-degree difference represents survival, but by the standards of most modern American homes, where thermostats hold steady at 68 to 72 degrees year-round, this cabin is cold. It is not cold by accident. Families living in remote Alaskan cabins maintain indoor winter temperatures between 55 and 65 degrees as intentional practice. This range balances multiple needs: wood conservation, safety, sleep quality, physical comfort under the specific conditions of extreme cold climate living. The mathematics of wood consumption explain part of this choice. Raising the interior temperature from 60 to 70 degrees requires significantly more fuel. Not just 10 degrees more heat, but exponentially more wood burned to fight the greater temperature differential with outside air. A cabin held at 70 degrees in minus 50 weather loses heat through walls, roof, and floor, at rates that demand near constant feeding of the stove. The wood supply is finite. What was cut, hauled, and split during summer and fall must last until spring. Running out of wood in February, with 2 more months of winter ahead and snow too deep for emergency resupply, is a scenario that haunts decision-making. Every degree of interior warmth has a cost measured in cords of wood, but the cooler temperature is not only about scarcity. It creates better conditions for sleep under heavy blankets. The human body sleeps most soundly in cooler environments. Modern sleep science confirms what cold climate dwellers have practiced for generations. Ambient temperatures in the low 60s produce deeper rest than overheated rooms. Under 5 layers of wool and down, in a bed warmed with hot water bottles, a 60-degree cabin feels entirely comfortable. The contrast between cool air on the face and warm cocoon surrounding the body is pleasant. It mimics conditions humans evolved sleeping under: shelter from elements, warmth from fire and bedding, but not tropical heat. Overheated cabins create problems. When the stove roars hot enough to bring the interior to 75 degrees, the air becomes painfully dry. Nosebleeds, cracked skin, respiratory discomfort. The moisture content of winter air is already minimal in these regions. Superheating that air indoors turns it desiccating. Extreme heat differentials also stress the cabin structure. Rapid temperature swings between very hot interior and very cold exterior cause wood to expand and contract dramatically. Chinking cracks, logs shift, the breathing quality of the walls becomes compromised. A moderate, stable temperature is gentler on the building itself. Safety factors matter too. A stove run hot enough to maintain 70+ degrees represents higher risk. The metal glows red. Creosote in the stovepipe can ignite. The fire demands constant attention and produces conditions where a moment's inattention could mean disaster. A moderate fire, carefully tended, burning at sustainable temperatures, is a safer fire. The families living this way dress for the indoor temperature. Long underwear is standard all winter. Fleece layers, wool sweaters, heavy socks. The concept of walking around a winter home in t-shirt and bare feet, normal in thermostat-controlled houses, is foreign here. This is not experienced as deprivation. It is simply appropriateness. You dress for the conditions you're in. The indoor conditions are vastly more comfortable than the outdoor ones, but they're still winter conditions. The clothing reflects that reality. Children grow up learning that warmth is not a constant background condition, but something you create and maintain. You sit near the stove when you're cold. You add layers. You drink hot tea. You move more. Warmth becomes active rather than passive. This teaches a relationship to comfort that is participatory. Visitors from urban areas sometimes struggle with this. They arrive expecting indoor temperatures to match what they're accustomed to. The 58-degree cabin feels cold to them initially. But within a day or two, with appropriate clothing and understanding of how to position oneself relative to the stove, most adapt. Some come to prefer it. The philosophy extends beyond temperature to a broader principle. Comfort does not require replicating summer conditions year-round. It requires appropriate response to actual conditions. Winter is cold. Acknowledging that fact and adapting to it, rather than trying to erase it entirely, creates sustainability. The cooler cabin temperature also maintains connection to the outside world. You can open the door without shocking contrast. You can step into the Arctic entry, or briefly outside without moving between two different climates. The transition is significant, but not jarring. You remain in winter, just sheltered from its extremes. Morning inside a 60-degree cabin means waking to cool air on your face. This is clarifying, invigorating. It creates motivation to rise and build up the fire, to start the day's activities. There is no temptation to linger in overheated drowsiness. The cool air calls you to action. This is warmth redefined, not as tropical heat applied to frozen landscape, but as careful balance, as enough, as sufficiency achieved through knowledge and appropriate tools. The cabin at 58 degrees, with fire tended and blankets layered and bodies dressed for the reality of winter, represents a kind of comfort that requires understanding to appreciate. But for those who live it, it is comfort nonetheless. Real, earned, sustained night after night through the long, cold darkness. Through every hour of the long winter night, while families sleep beneath their layers of wool and down, the stove continues its steady work. Metal heats and cools. Smoke rises. And with this essential warmth comes the responsibility that has always accompanied fire inside human shelter. The families who live this way maintain awareness passed through generations alongside newer knowledge. They understand that the wood stove keeping them alive requires constant respect. The stovepipe extends upward from the firebox, through the ceiling, continuing above the roofline. Most installations rise at least 3 feet past the peak. At the top, a spark arrestor caps the opening, a metal screen that allows smoke to exit while preventing embers from drifting onto the snow-covered roof or landing in the surrounding spruce. This vertical column of metal carries smoke and gases from combustion out into the frozen air. But it also accumulates creosote, the dark, sticky residue that forms when wood smoke cools and condenses on interior surfaces. In cabins where the stove burns continuously from October through March, creosote builds quickly. The substance is flammable. If ignited, it produces a roaring chimney fire that can reach temperatures hot enough to crack metal or ignite surrounding wood structures. So families maintain cleaning schedules as regular as their fire-tending rituals. Once a week during the coldest months, someone climbs to access the stovepipe. They use long-handled brushes designed to scrape the interior surfaces, dislodging the buildup before it becomes dangerous. The work happens during the brief daylight hours when the stove has cooled slightly from its overnight burn. The loosened creosote falls down into the firebox to be burned away in the next hot fire. This is not optional maintenance. It is survival practice. The families also understand the danger that has no smell, no color, no warning. Carbon monoxide forms when combustion occurs without sufficient oxygen. In a properly functioning wood stove with adequate air intake and an unobstructed pipe, the gas exits with the smoke. But if the flue becomes blocked, if dampers are closed too tightly, if the cabin is sealed without adequate fresh air supply, carbon monoxide can accumulate in the living space. It causes confusion before unconsciousness. In a sleeping family, it can kill without anyone waking. Traditional awareness involves maintaining fresh air intake even in the coldest weather. No cabin is ever sealed completely while the stove burns. Small gaps around windows, intentional ventilation in the Arctic entry, careful damper adjustment that allows draw. These practices create the continuous air exchange that prevents buildup. Many families now keep small battery-operated carbon monoxide detectors near sleeping areas. The devices are tested regularly, batteries changed on schedule. This is newer knowledge joining older practice. Both matter. The adults who tend these fires through winter have learned to read the stove's behavior. They notice if smoke lingers when the door opens, if the fire struggles to draw air, if the cabin feels stuffy despite cold outside. These signs prompt immediate investigation, checking the pipe, adjusting dampers, opening a window briefly to clear the air. Children grow up understanding these realities alongside the comfort of the fire's warmth. They learn that the same flames providing heat require knowledge and attention. They watch parents maintain equipment, perform inspections, respond to subtle changes in how the system functions. The wood stove represents both safety and risk. Families living in remote cabins accept this relationship. They manage it through vigilance that becomes habitual, through maintenance that becomes routine, through respect that never diminishes even after decades of burning fires through winter nights. The spark arrestor catches embers. The weekly brushing prevents dangerous buildup. The carbon monoxide detector provides backup awareness. The careful damper settings maintain proper draw. The small gaps allow fresh air to enter. And through all of this attention, the stove continues its work. Warmth spreads through the small space. Snow falls outside. The family sleeps, protected by fire and by the accumulated knowledge that keeps fire safe. Inside the cabin, where the stove radiates heat in all directions, the placement and construction of sleeping areas follows principles as deliberate as the fire-tending rituals. Beds are not arranged by preference or aesthetics. They occupy specific positions determined by how air moves in a heated space and where cold concentrates during the long night. Many families build sleeping platforms rather than using conventional bed frames. These structures stand 2 or 3 feet above the floor, raised on sturdy posts or timber supports. The elevation serves a clear purpose. Cold air is denser than warm air. As the cabin cools between fire loadings, the coldest air settles downward, pooling along the floorboards. The temperature difference between floor level and 3 feet up can reach 10 or 15 degrees on the coldest nights. A child sleeping on the floor would spend the night in the coldest layer of air in the cabin. A child on a raised platform sleeps in noticeably warmer space, requiring fewer blankets and waking less often from chill. The platforms are built from spruce planks, wide enough for 1 adult or 2 children. Some families construct them along interior walls where the logs face the heated cabin interior rather than the frozen air outside. Others position them near the center of the space, closer to the stove's direct warmth. What they avoid is placing beds against exterior walls. Even with proper chinking and thick log construction, an exterior wall in winter radiates cold inward. The logs themselves, conducting heat outward to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit air, become cool to the touch on their interior surface. A person sleeping 6 inches from that wall loses body heat through radiation to the cold surface all night. So beds stand at least 2 feet from exterior walls when possible. In small cabins, where space is limited, families hang wool blankets or caribou hides between the bed and the wall, creating an insulating air gap that interrupts the cold radiation. The most prized sleeping location in many cabins is the loft. Where ceiling height allows, families build elevated sleeping platforms reached by ladder or steep stairs. These occupy the space near the roof peak, often stretching across half the cabin's length. Children usually sleep here. The warmest air in the cabin rises continuously. Heat from the stove flows upward, accumulating in the highest spaces before slowly cooling and descending again. A loft, positioned 7 or 8 feet above the floor, stays consistently warmer than any other sleeping area. Children bedded in the loft sleep through the night more easily. The temperature there remains relatively stable even as the main floor cools. Parents below wake to tend the fire, but children above rarely stir until morning. The loft also removes children from floor-level drafts, the small currents of cold air that enter through necessary ventilation gaps and slide along the floor before warming and rising. Some families install curtains that can be drawn across the loft opening at night, creating a smaller space that holds warmth even more effectively. The curtain, heavy canvas or wool, traps the rising heat in the loft area while allowing just enough air exchange to prevent stuffiness. Adults typically sleep on the main floor, closer to the stove they will need to tend. Their platforms position them within a few steps of the firebox. In the middle of the night, an adult can swing legs off the platform, take 3 steps, and reach the stove to add logs, all without fully waking, all in the dark or by minimal lamplight. The sleeping platforms themselves are topped with whatever provides insulation from below. Some families use straw ticks, canvas bags filled with dried grass that compress into firm mattresses. Others layer foam pads salvaged from town, or folded wool blankets, or caribou hides with the hair still on. The goal is preventing body heat from conducting downward into the wood platform. Any air gap or insulating material between sleeper and wood improves warmth retention. In the smallest cabins, a single large platform might accommodate the entire family, parents and children side by side, sharing warmth through proximity. In larger spaces, separate platforms allow each person their own sleeping area while maintaining the strategic positioning that keeps everyone in the warmest available air. These decisions, elevation, distance from walls, loft access, proximity to the stove, represent generations of experience with how heat moves through small spaces during long, cold nights. Each family adapts the principles to their specific cabin, their number of children, their tolerance for cold, but all follow the same fundamental understanding. Where you sleep determines how you sleep. Position matters as much as blankets, and cold air, like water, always seeks the lowest point. The bed becomes a sleeping system, not just a place to lie down, but a constructed environment designed to hold warmth through hours when the fire might burn low and cabin temperatures drop toward 50 degrees. Families layer materials with the same attention they give to loading the stove. Each blanket, each hide, each carefully chosen textile serves a specific purpose in the architecture of warmth. Traditional caribou hide blankets still appear in many cabins, especially those connected to indigenous knowledge. The hides breathe in ways synthetic materials cannot. They insulate even when they absorb moisture from breath and body heat during sleep. This quality matters in a small cabin where humidity from cooking, breathing, and the water reservoir condenses on cold surfaces through the night. A caribou hide stays warm against skin, even as it holds dampness. It doesn't compress flat like modern fabrics, maintaining the air pockets that create the actual insulation. Moose hide sleeping robes serve similar function, though their weight makes them better suited as outer layers. Some families keep these materials not only for warmth, but for the continuity they represent. A grandmother's sewn blanket provides comfort beyond its thermal properties. It connects the current night to generations of winter nights survived in this same landscape. Most cabins combine traditional and modern approaches. 3 to 5 wool blankets form the foundation of the bed system. Not one thick comforter, but multiple thinner layers. This allows adjustment through the night. When the stove burns hot after the 9 o'clock loading, a sleeper might push aside the top 2 blankets. By 3 in the morning, when the fire has consumed half its fuel and the cabin has cooled, those same blankets get pulled back up. The layering creates flexibility that a single heavy covering cannot provide. Wool blankets specifically for their performance in cold. They insulate when damp, unlike cotton, which becomes dangerously cold when it absorbs moisture. They create texture and air spaces rather than lying flat against the body. Many families seek out old Hudson Bay blankets or military surplus wool. Weight matters. A quality wool blanket weighs several pounds and creates a gentle pressure that helps the body relax into sleep. Down comforters appear as top layers in many cabins. These might be rated for -20 degrees Fahrenheit or colder, designed for extreme camping, but repurposed for nightly use. Some families use sleeping bags instead, unzipped and spread across the bed, providing a familiar cocoon. Children especially prefer this arrangement. The bag's defined edges creating a secure boundary in the dark. Flannel sheets serve as the base layer, the surface against skin. Cotton feels cold in a 55-degree bedroom, drawing heat away from the body. Flannel's brushed surface traps a thin layer of warmed air. Most families keep multiple sets, rotating them so there's always a dry pair ready, while the others hang near the stove, absorbing radiant heat and becoming almost luxuriously warm for the next night's sleep. The mattress itself sits on a platform or frame that raises it 8 to 12 inches above the floor. cold air settles at floor level. Even this small elevation makes a difference in overnight comfort. Some cabins use the old practice of rope-strung bed frames that allow air circulation beneath the mattress, preventing moisture accumulation that would create cold spots. Dressing for bed becomes as intentional as preparing the fire. Families don't change into light pajamas. They dress in wool, long underwear, or thick fleece layers, preparing their bodies for the temperature changes that will come through the night. These aren't just comfortable clothes. They're functional insulation, chosen for how they breathe and maintain warmth even during the walk to the outhouse or the middle night trip to reload the stove. Wool socks remain on through sleep. Feet cool first when cabin temperatures drop, and cold feet prevent deep rest. Many people keep an extra pair of wool socks on the small bedside table or tucked under the edge of the mattress. When they wake at 3 to tend the fire, they pull on the fresh socks before standing on the wooden floor that has absorbed the night's cold. Wool caps or fleece-lined beanies appear on many heads at bedtime. Significant body heat escapes through the scalp. A simple knit cap can make the difference between sleeping soundly under the current blanket arrangement or needing to add another layer. Children sometimes resist this practice, but most adapt quickly once they experience how much warmer they sleep with covered heads. This bedding system represents accumulated knowledge. The specific combination varies by family, by cabin design, by personal cold tolerance. But the principle remains constant. You build warmth in layers. You choose materials that insulate when damp. You prepare your body with clothing designed for function, not fashion. And you accept that sleeping warm in deep winter requires this level of intention. The reward comes in the deep rest that follows, the security of knowing you've built a warm refuge that will hold through the long darkness ahead. The transition to bed requires changing clothes, but not in the way most people imagine. This isn't about comfort or cleanliness. It's about preparing the body as carefully as the cabin for the temperature changes that will arrive through the night. What you wear to sleep determines whether you wake shivering at 2 in the morning or rest undisturbed until the natural middle-night fire check. Wool, long underwear forms the foundation, not the thin base layers designed for athletic activity, but substantial thermal underwear with weight and thickness. Many families prefer traditional wool despite its reputation for itchiness. Modern merino wool offers softness, but the older, coarser varieties actually create more air pockets and insulate more effectively. The slight scratch against skin becomes unnoticeable within minutes of settling under blankets. Over the long underwear, some people add fleece pants and a fleece top. Others wear thick cotton or wool sweats. The goal is bulk without constriction. Tight clothing compresses insulation and restricts the small movements that generate warmth during sleep. Loose layers trap air between them, creating multiple zones of insulation around the body's core. Children often sleep in one-piece fleece suits or thick-footed pajamas, the kind designed for infants, but made in sizes up to age 10 or 12. These eliminate gaps where cold might reach skin. A child can kick off blankets in deep sleep without immediately becoming dangerously cold. Parents check on children during the middle-night fire tending, adjusting blankets that have been pushed aside, but the heavy sleeping clothes provide backup protection. Wool socks stay on through the night. This practice feels strange to people accustomed to sleeping barefoot or in light socks, but in a cabin where temperatures might drop to 50 degrees by morning, uncovered feet prevent deep sleep. The body prioritizes warming the extremities, diverting resources and creating restlessness. Heavy wool socks, the kind designed for winter boots, solve this problem. Some people wear 2 pairs, though this risks constriction. The goal is warmth without tightness that restricts circulation. Extra socks wait within reach of the bed. When someone rises at 3 to reload the stove, they step onto wooden floors that have absorbed hours of cold. Even with wool socks already on, the shock of that cold floor travels up through the body. Fresh socks, still warm from tucking under the mattress edge or keeping under the pillow, make the journey to the stove more tolerable. This small preparation prevents the full waking that comes from sudden cold, allowing the fire tender to return to sleep more easily. Wool caps or fleece-lined beanies complete the sleeping outfit for many adults. The head radiates significant heat, and in a cooling cabin, that loss becomes noticeable. A simple knit cap keeps warmth close to the scalp and prevents the slight headache some people experience when sleeping in cold air. Children resist this more than adults, pushing caps off during sleep. But by adolescence, most adopt the practice voluntarily once they understand its effectiveness. Some families keep their heaviest layers near the bed rather than wearing them to sleep. A thick fleece jacket or wool cardigan stays draped over the bedpost. When the middle night cold arrives, it takes seconds to pull on before walking to the stove. This approach allows for lighter sleeping clothes during the warmest part of the night, adding insulation only when temperatures drop. The outhouse trip requires additional preparation. A heavy coat hangs near the door, along with insulated boots kept loose enough to shove feet into without unlacing. No one ventures outside at 20 below in just their sleeping clothes, even for the brief sprint to the small building 20 feet from the cabin. The shock of that cold could prevent returning to sleep. The outdoor layer gets pulled on over everything else, worn for the 2-minute round trip, then stripped off immediately upon return so its coldness doesn't contaminate the warming bed. This system of sleeping clothes represents a fundamental shift in thinking about nighttime. In heated homes, people undress for bed, removing the day's layers to sleep in minimal clothing under a light blanket. In a remote cabin, you dress for bed, adding specific layers chosen for their insulating properties. The ritual signals to the body that preparation is happening. The weight and warmth of proper sleeping clothes create security, a physical readiness for the temperature changes that will come. Morning brings the reverse process, but it happens gradually. No one leaps from bed to strip off sleeping layers. The cabin must warm first. People move to the stove area still wearing their sleeping wool and fleece, waiting for the new fire to build heat before considering changing into day clothes. Sometimes, on the coldest mornings, the sleeping layers stay on under regular clothes, adding extra insulation for morning chores that might involve carrying wood or checking on cached supplies in unheated storage areas. This practice teaches children that comfort isn't about being barely covered. It's about appropriate preparation. Those raised in cabins learn that warmth comes from layering, from choosing the right materials, from understanding that what touches your skin matters as much as what burns in the stove. They learn that sleeping warm is an active choice, not a passive expectation. And they carry this knowledge into adulthood, often finding modern lightweight pajamas absurdly inadequate when they visit homes with thermostats and central heat. An hour before sleep, someone fills the bottles, heavy-duty Nalgene containers, traditional rubber hot water bottles wrapped in wool sleeves, metal canteens that hold heat even longer. They're filled from the reservoir built into the side of the wood stove, where water has simmered all day, heated by the same fire that warms the cabin. The water comes out nearly boiling, too hot to hold against skin, which is exactly what's needed. Each bottle is sealed tight and tested for leaks. A drip in a bed during winter is more than inconvenient. It's dangerous. Wet bedding loses all insulating capacity, so the caps are twisted firmly, the bottles shaken upside down, checked before they're carried to the sleeping areas. Children receive theirs first. The bottles are placed at the foot of each bed, down where small feet will find them when they crawl under the covers. Some families wrap the bottles in towels for slower heat release. Others place them directly against flannel sheets, creating an immediate pool of warmth. The heat radiates outward, transforming a cold bed into something welcoming. Adults place their own bottles, sometimes at the feet, sometimes at the core of the bed where kidneys and lower back rest. The warmth sinks into muscles that have worked all day hauling wood, melting snow, maintaining the cabin. It's a concentrated heat that heavy blankets will trap and hold. These bottles remain warm for 4 to 6 hours. Through the deepest part of the first sleep, when bodies are most still and generate the least heat themselves, the bottles continue radiating. By the time they've cooled to merely warm, morning is approaching and the cycle begins again. Before darkness settles completely, water work demands attention. Every gallon the family will need through the night must already be inside. Outside, rivers freeze solid except where current runs fastest. Snow becomes the primary source, but snow contains far more air than water. A full pot melts to barely 2 inches of liquid. Someone makes a final trip to the ice hole if the family maintains one. These holes are cut through river ice with an auger or axe, marked with a stake, so they can be found under new snow, kept open by daily use. A bucket drops through on a rope. The water comes up brutally cold but liquid, already better than snow for most purposes. Inside, large pots of snow sit on the stove. They hiss and settle as heat works through the packed white layers. Steam rises, adding moisture to air that winter tries to strip of every drop of humidity. This steam matters. Without it, nasal passages crack and bleed during sleep. Skin splits at knuckles and lips. The moisture from melting snow becomes part of the cabin's breathable atmosphere. Containers line the wall near the stove. 5-gallon jugs, enamel pots, a large basin for morning washing. All are filled before the family settles. There will be no trips outside once everyone is in their layers and the final fire loading is complete. Everything needed for the long night must be within reach. Water for drinking if someone wakes thirsty, water for the morning coffee, water to refill hot water bottles if the middle-night fire tender chooses to refresh them. The sound of this work fills the cabin. Water pouring, the metallic settling of snow in pots, steam hissing where it touches cooler air. These sounds mean preparation, safety, the completion of necessary work before rest. Dinner preparation in the cabin begins earlier than it might in a heated home. By mid-afternoon, someone begins preparing the evening meal. This timing is not arbitrary. Extended cooking serves 2 purposes equally important: nourishment and heat generation. The wood stove that has burned steadily all day becomes a kitchen range. Cast iron pots settle onto the stovetop. Heavy Dutch ovens occupy the hottest zones. The food chosen for winter meals reflects the dual purpose they serve. Soups simmer for hours. Stews cook slowly. Bread bakes in the oven compartment if the stove includes one, or in a Dutch oven if it does not. These are not merely traditional foods. They are foods whose preparation radiates warmth into the cabin for extended periods. A pot of caribou stew might cook for 3 hours. During that time, steam rises steadily. Heat radiates from cast iron. The moisture released into the air prevents the painful dryness that intense wood heat can create. The kitchen area becomes the warmest zone in the cabin, several degrees warmer than spaces farther from the stove. Family members gravitate to this warmth naturally. Someone peels vegetables at the table nearest the stove. Children complete tasks within the warm zone. Conversation happens here. The evening meal's preparation becomes a gathering point, drawing people together, not just for the food itself, but for the warmth generated in its making. The stove works harder during cooking. More wood feeds the fire to maintain temperature for hours of simmering. This is not waste. This is the warmth that carries the cabin through evening, the heat that makes the space comfortable as darkness deepens outside. As evening settles, a checklist unfolds. These tasks have been performed so many times, they require little conscious thought, yet each one matters. The cabin must be sealed against the night. Weather stripping around the door receives attention. Hands press along the edges, feeling for any draft. Even a small gap allows cold air to snake inside, stealing warmth the stove has worked hours to create. If the felt or rubber stripping has compressed or shifted, it gets adjusted now. Interior shutters close over windows. These simple wooden panels, hinged at the sides, swing shut and latch. They create an air gap between the cold glass and the cabin's interior. This dead air space functions as insulation. A window covered by a shutter loses far less heat through the night than bare glass would allow. The storm door, the outer door in the Arctic entry, gets checked and secured. Its seal matters as much as the inner doors. The small entry space between them holds cold air, preventing it from rushing into the main cabin each time someone enters or exits. Damp items find position near the stove. Mittens drying from the day's work, bootliners pulled out to release moisture, a coat hung carefully at the right distance, close enough to dry, far enough to avoid scorching. As these items release their moisture, the cabin's air gains humidity. This matters. Extremely dry air makes breathing uncomfortable during sleep. The gentle addition of moisture from drying items helps maintain air that feels breathable rather than harsh. The evening checklist continues. The water supply for the night gets confirmed. The wood box beside the stove gets filled one final time. The cabin transforms from its daytime state into a sealed environment prepared to hold warmth through darkness. The wood pile stands 20 feet from the cabin door. Before darkness settles completely, someone makes the last trip outside. This final wood run isn't casual. It determines how smoothly morning will begin and whether the overnight fire will burn as planned. The task follows a pattern. First, kindling. Thin splits of birch bark and dry spruce twigs go into one arm. These will start tomorrow's fire when the cabin is cold and fingers are stiff. Then small splits, wrist thick, that catch quickly from kindling flame. Finally, the overnight logs. Each one gets examined. Hands check for weight, for the density that means slow burning. A large piece of birch, 2 sections of tamarack. These will matter at midnight, and again at 3 in the morning. Children often help with this work. A 10-year-old learns to judge wood by heft and species. They learn which pieces split cleanly and which hide rot inside solid-looking bark. They learn that selecting tonight's wood is selecting tomorrow's warmth. The knowledge passes through action, through repetition, through the consequence of poor choices discovered at dawn. The woodpile itself tells stories. Families can estimate remaining winter supply at a glance. They know when to start cutting next year's fuel. Everyone carries wood differently. Some load their arms full. Others make multiple trips with smaller loads. What matters is that the wood box inside fills completely before darkness makes the path uncertain. The box holds 36 hours of fuel, minimum. Tonight's burning, tomorrow's cooking, tomorrow night's burning. By 3:30 in the afternoon, Daylight weakens. The brief window of natural light that arrived around 10 this morning now fades. Families don't fight this transition. They work with it. The first lamp gets lit in the kitchen area. Kerosene or LED, it creates a warm pool of light on the table. This is the signal. The day's outdoor work ends. Evening tasks begin. A second lamp goes on the shelf near the stove. Its glow reaches the seating area where someone might read or mend clothing. A third lamp, smaller, sits near the water basin. These pools of light define the evening geography. The cabin's far corners stay dark. No one needs light everywhere. The darkness itself becomes comfortable. This gradual dimming works with the body rather than against it. There's no harsh transition from bright workspace to sudden darkness. The mind registers the change slowly. Lamplight is softer than daylight, warmer in color. It doesn't suppress melatonin the way electric bulbs do. Children grow quiet as lamps come on. Their play shifts from active to calm. They gather near the stove's warmth, near the lamp's light. This isn't enforced. It happens naturally, the way animals settle as darkness arrives. Through the small windows, the last blue light fades from snow. Inside, lamp flames flicker slightly when someone walks past. Shadows move on log walls. The orange glow from the stove's air vents adds its own light, pulsing gently with the fire's breathing. This is the threshold. Day has ended. The long night begins its approach. Around 9 o'clock, the cabin's rhythm shifts toward night. Dishes are washed. Water containers stand full. The wood box beside the stove holds tomorrow's kindling and the night's fuel. What happens in the next 15 minutes determines whether morning arrives to a warm cabin or one gone cold in the hours before dawn. The final fire loading is not like the casual additions made through the day. This is engineering. The stove must burn for 8, perhaps 10 hours, maintaining enough heat to keep the cabin livable, but not so hot it burns through fuel by midnight. The person doing the loading, often the adult who will wake naturally around 2 or 3 to check, approaches the stove with knowledge accumulated over years with this particular firebox, this chimney draft, these wood species. First, the existing fire is assessed. Coals are raked forward. The bed must be deep and hot, a foundation that will ignite the new wood gradually rather than all at once. Some families add 1 medium log now, letting it catch fully before the main loading begins. This creates a layer of active flame that will work upward through the night's fuel. Then comes the selection. The logs chosen now are large, 6 to 8 inches in diameter, cut to the stove's exact length so they fit with minimal gaps. Species matters enormously. Birch burns too fast for this purpose. Spruce can work if the pieces are thick enough, but tamarack is preferred, or white spruce from slow-growing northern stands where the wood is dense and resinous. Some families swear by a specific mix. 2 tamarack logs flanking 1 thick spruce, the different burn rates balancing each other. The arrangement follows principles learned through cold mornings. Logs are placed tightly but not compressed. Air must flow between them, but not so freely that they burn like kindling. They run front to back, positioned so the primary air intake will hit them at an angle that promotes slow ignition. The damper, a metal plate in the stovepipe that controls draft, is adjusted to a position that might look almost closed to an outsider, but represents this family's specific formula for their elevation, their chimney height, tonight's outside temperature. Children watch this ritual, learning to read what their parents read, the sound of the metal door closing, the particular tick of expanding metal as new wood heats, the color of flame visible through the small vents. Yellow and lazy means the damper is right. Roaring orange means too much air, wood that will be gone by midnight. Before the family settles completely into their own night, many cabins participate in a ritual that extends beyond their walls. The radio, often a high-frequency transceiver powered by battery bank or small generator, comes alive with voices. The evening check-in schedule varies by region, but the pattern is similar. At a designated time, families on a shared frequency make brief contact. The Hendersons, 18 miles northeast, the Kowalskis, 23 miles southwest, the Chens at the old trapping cabin, 40 miles up the river. Voices emerging from static, confirming that everyone made it through another day, that stoves are loaded, that all is well before darkness deepens. The conversations are practical. Weather observations compared, ice conditions on the river discussed. Someone mentions a moose spotted near the trail. Another asks if anyone has spare lamp oil. They're running low and won't make it to town until the route is passable again. The exchanges last minutes, not hours. But underneath the practicality runs something else. These voices are proof that beyond the small circle of lamplight, beyond the log walls holding back cold and darkness, other families are doing exactly what this family is doing. Loading stoves, checking children, preparing for the long night. The isolation is real. Help could not arrive quickly if needed, but the aloneness is tempered by knowing others inhabit the same darkness, follow the same rhythms. When the radio goes quiet again, there is comfort in the silence. The cabin feels both more isolated and less alone. Each family settles into their own space, carrying the knowledge that across miles of frozen forest, other fires burn, other families sleep warm, other people will wake in the cold hours to tend flames, just as they will. The stove ticks softly as metal adjusts to heat. Outside, wind moves through spruce branches. Inside, lamp wicks are turned down, then extinguished. The night begins. The first hours after the final fire loading bring the deepest sleep of the night. The cabin holds its peak warmth. The stove radiates heat steadily through the darkness. Bodies relax completely under layers of wool and down, into beds warmed by hot water bottles still releasing their stored heat. This is the sleep that comes easiest. Children in their loft spaces rarely stir during these hours. The warmest air has risen to where they rest. Their breathing stays even and slow. For them, the night passes as one continuous arc of sleep, unbroken unless temperatures drop far beyond what the stove can sustain. But on most nights, with the fire properly loaded and the cabin sealed, they sleep straight through until morning light. The sounds of the cabin become part of this sleep rather than interruptions to it. Wind moves against the log walls with a low, steady pressure. Snow slides from the metal roof in soft rushes when its accumulated weight finally releases. The stove ticks quietly as metal expands with heat, then contracts as flames settle into their slower overnight burn. These sounds carry no threat. They're the familiar voice of shelter doing its work. Adults sleep differently. Their rest remains deep during these first hours, but somewhere in their awareness lives the knowledge that the fire will need tending before dawn. This knowledge doesn't prevent sleep. It simply shapes it into something more watchful than the sleep of childhood. The first waking comes naturally. There's no alarm. Bodies sense the shift in temperature as the cabin begins to cool. What was 62 degrees at bedtime has dropped to perhaps 55. The change registers even through sleep. Someone rises, often the same person each night, though not always. The floor feels cold through wool socks. Darkness fills the cabin almost completely. A hand reaches out, finds the wall, follows it toward the stove's location more by memory than sight. No lamp gets lit yet. The process happens mostly by touch. A hand hovers near the stove's surface, reading its warmth. Still hot, but the fierce heat of earlier has mellowed. The damper gets adjusted first, opening airflow slightly. Then the stove door, its handle wrapped in cloth against the heat that remains in the iron. Inside, coals glow red in the darkness. Not flames, but sustained embers. This is what the overnight loading is designed to create. The logs haven't burned away. They've burned down into this slower state that produces steady heat for hours. 2 or 3 new logs get added. Not small kindling. Substantial pieces of birch or tamarack, placed carefully across the coal bed. The damper gets adjusted again. The door closes. The whole process takes perhaps 3 minutes. Return to bed happens quickly. The floor seems even colder now on the return path. The blankets welcome. And within moments comes the sound that makes sleep possible again. Fresh wood catching fire. Small pops and cracks as bark ignites. The quiet rush of new flames finding their hold. The stove ticks as metal expands with renewed heat. Sleep returns. Not slowly, but almost immediately. The task is complete. The cabin's warmth is secured for another few hours. The long night continues. The cabin does not hold one steady temperature through the night. It moves through rhythms of warmth and cooling, tied to the fire's consumption of fuel and the long intervals between loadings. After the evening's careful packing, when large logs fill the firebox and dampers stand adjusted to their learned positions, the cabin reaches its warmest point. The air near the ceiling might touch 65 degrees. The sleeping loft where children rest beneath blankets holds this warmth longest. Then begins the slow decline. Over the next 4 hours, as wood converts to ember and ember to ash, the temperature drops. 10 degrees, 12. 15 in the hours closest to dawn. Under 3 or 4 layers of wool blankets, bodies insulated in long underwear and fleece, families rarely notice. The cocoon of bedding holds heat efficiently. Only when cabin air approaches 45 or 50 degrees does the cold begin to penetrate enough to wake an adult. The coldest hour arrives between 4 and 6 in the morning. The fire has burned lowest. Outside darkness still dominates completely. This is when frost appears on interior walls in the cabin's coldest corners. Thin crystals forming where moisture from breathing and cooking meets wood chilled by proximity to outer cold. This frost serves as visible evidence. The cabin holds back winter, but not perfectly. The temperature gradient remains real. Cold presses constantly against every log surface. The envelope of warmth contracts and expands with each fire cycle, a breathing rhythm measured across hours instead of seconds. Families who have tended fires through many winters recognize these patterns without consulting thermometers. The quality of air tells them what the temperature has reached. Young children sleeping in loft spaces experience winter nights differently than the adults below. Warm air rises. The sleeping area built into the cabin's upper level, tucked beneath the peaked roof, remains the warmest zone throughout the night. While temperatures near the floor might drop to 50 degrees in the pre-dawn hours, the loft holds closer to 60. This 10-degree difference matters significantly for small bodies with less mass to generate and retain heat. Children sleep more continuously than their parents. They do not wake naturally when the fire needs tending. Wrapped in their own layers of blankets, positioned in the warmest available air, they often sleep straight through from evening until the morning fire has already been rebuilt and the cabin warms again toward comfort. For them, this becomes completely normal. The ritual of heavy bedding, the wool clothing worn to sleep, the sound of wind and occasional snow sliding from the roof. These form the ordinary texture of night. They do not experience it as hardship or unusual effort. Families report that adaptation happens quickly and thoroughly. A child raised through even 1 or 2 winters in a remote cabin accepts the routines without resistance. Fire tending, clothing layers, the specific sequence of evening preparations. All of it simply becomes how night works. Some who grew up in cabins and later moved to urban homes describe the opposite adjustment as more difficult. Constant temperatures felt strange. The hum of forced air heating seemed intrusive. They missed the quieter sounds, the purposeful rituals, the tangible connection between effort and warmth. Someone wakes first, while darkness still presses against the windows. In deep winter, sunrise may not arrive until 10 or 11 in the morning. The person who rises now, often on a rotation among adults, moves into air that has cooled to 50 degrees. The overnight fire has burned down to coals buried in ash. The work ahead requires both skill and patience. This is the coldest task of the day. The fire builder's feet meet the shock of cold floor. Wool socks offer some protection, but the wood planks have spent hours radiating their stored heat upward and outward. The stove itself still holds warmth in its iron body, though the cabin air has dropped 15 degrees since the last loading 6 hours ago. Building flame from coals begins with tinder, crumpled newspaper if the family has it, birch bark strips gathered and dried months earlier. These materials ignite quickly from even modest heat. The stove door opens. A faint orange glow reveals buried coals. The fire builder arranges tinder directly over these embers, then builds a careful structure of kindling above, small dry sticks positioned to allow airflow. The arrangement matters. Stack too tightly and flame suffocates. Space too loosely and heat dissipates before igniting the next layer. The damper opens fully. Air feeds the coals. Small flames appear, tentative at first, testing the kindling. The fire builder watches, adds another piece where flame hesitates, adjusts the structure without smothering what has started. This is not instant. This requires waiting while flame establishes itself, spreads, gains confidence. 5 minutes. 10. Only when kindling burns steadily do larger split pieces join the fire, positioned to catch from below while leaving channels for draft. The cabin begins its transformation from cold silence to warm activity. The morning fire burns hot now. The cabin has warmed. But even as light returns and the long night ends, thoughts have already turned toward evening. This is how cabin families live through winter. Not day by day as separate units, but as a continuous cycle where each phase prepares for the next. The work of staying warm never truly stops. It simply shifts form. By mid-morning, someone walks to the woodpile. Not for immediate need. The morning supply was gathered last night. This trip serves a different purpose. It assesses what remains. It checks the quality of the wood under its snow cover. It calculates silently how many more nights the current pile will carry the family through before another cutting expedition becomes necessary. As morning comes to one remote cabin, evening approaches another 100 miles away. Across the interior, families load stoves, close shutters, and settle beneath layers of wool and down. The same routines unfold in different hands, wood chosen, dampers adjusted, water bottles filled. Outside, darkness spreads across frozen forests and silent rivers. Inside, small fires glow. The wind finds no entry. The cold presses close but stops at log walls chinked with care. Children sleep warm in lofts. Adults wake briefly, tend flames, return to rest. This is how it has been, how it continues, warmth created by knowledge and effort, night after night, through the long Alaskan winter.